Welcome to our Interdependence series. We are so excited to have you here. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Successfully Self-Employed, which is founded by Candace. This community has been an instrumental part in this journey. And this community is all about connection. I'm part of this fantastic community. And if you are looking for a community that is about connection, accountability, and so much more, I would highly recommend joining. Now, as we get started, I just wanted to set the tone for this session. It's really a at your own pace kind of workshop where you can have your screen on, have your screen off, you can engage, but it's more about your takeaway and really engaging at your own capacity. So while we get started, you will be needing a pen and paper. You can use your journal, you can use your phone, you can use anything, and you can close your eyes if you want and just listen along. We just want to set you up for success as we learn and finish off. This session is also going to go offline, and we will have some questions that I will be asking via Zoom, and this is when your pen and paper will come in handy. But there also might be some things that we discuss that also might trigger something, and you might want to write it down. So keep it handy with you throughout the session. Wonderful. So just as an overview, today we'll be doing the interdependence workshop. The agenda for today is basically that we'll do the introduction, which is already on its way. Then we'll have Jessie, who will be hosting the actual workshop. And then, as mentioned before, we will be going into Zoom for the private session. So we are so excited to have you here and on this journey today. And thank you again for joining us. With interdependence, I've explained this a couple of times, and for those people who have joined us before, I know that you've heard this, and I will be adding in some extra information for you because I know it's the same thing that you've heard. But for those who haven't joined us, I'd like to give you a little bit of insight as to what we are doing here today. I was inspired by the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, written by Stephen Covey, where he speaks about the maturity continuum. And this is where we go from dependence to independence, and that's where most people feel stuck. He then speaks about a third place, which is interdependence. Now, this is about emotional intelligence and emotional responsibility. One of the affirmations that I always like to say, which comes from the book, says, I have the freedom to choose how I respond to my environment, even if I'm feeling insert emotion, anger, sad, resentment, anything. So, this is where the quest for interdependence in the workspace began. Stephen Covey. Now, a lot of people, when I ask them if they've read the book, they always say, yes, I know the book, but I haven't read it. And this, I feel, is because the book in itself is actually quite overwhelming. It's just such a wealth of knowledge that even one sentence you want to read, you want to think about this through your entire week. So, I'm going to speak about one habit from the book that we can take away that is related to this journey that I am on of interdependence in the workspace. I challenge you then to go ahead and, if you have your copy, to read the specific habit that we are talking about today and just get that insight from that. Now, with this quest I'm on, I understood that I needed to break this down with first principles thinking and work it my way back up. And what I found was that communication is at the base of the interdependence space. So, what that means is that communication is really something that is so important for us to be able to coexist together. So, as leveraging that, I'm going to speak about the public victory. Now, this is in the book, and he discusses this as the 3 different habits: habit 4, 5, and 6. And in summary, what this is basically working effectively with others, reaching interdependence. So let's look at habit number 5. So this habit says seek first to understand, then to be understood. Now, if we think about this, some of the biggest mistakes that we make in communication is that we don't listen, and we don't listen to understand. We listen to reply. While the other person is speaking, we're usually just getting our own reply or comments while they're speaking, barely paying attention. So there are some points that Covey discusses on this, and I'm going to briefly go over this. Now, again, Jesse is going to have an amazing session. I'm just setting the tone for this. So have this as in the back of your head as a challenge for when you go and you read the book, and you'll see these concepts coming up and see it as repetition, and for you to be able to remember this a little bit easier and not get so overwhelmed by this amazing book. So let's look at the first one, which says diagnose before you prescribe. If you think about it, going to a doctor, if you walk into the doctor and before you even say what hurts or how you're feeling, and he simply hands you a pill and says, take this, you wouldn't really trust them or take the pill. I know I wouldn't. But we do this all the time in conversation. We jump in with advice before we even actually understand what's going on. So you have to first understand the problem before you try and fix it. Now let's look at the second one, deep listening. This means that with the goal of truly trying to understand how the other person feels and thinks. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, but here we're trying to get them. When we listen poorly, we fall into some bad habits, which include judging the person. We instantly decide if they are right or wrong, just with a small amount of information. Number two is interrogating. We turn a conversation into a police interrogation and grill them with questions from our own point of view and our lived experiences. Next is fixing. We instantly start to give advice, again, based on our own lived experiences, without taking into consideration the person's life view and so many other unique experiences. Finally, number four, which I think I am definitely guilty of, is guessing. And this is trying to figure out their motives without understanding. So if there's one thing you can take away from this, is to try a habit of understanding. So, what that means is, first of all, try to repeat back what they've said, even go as far as to say, tell me more. If you are in the information gathering stage, if you're trying to understand them, you want them to tell them more. They want you to repeat what they've said. And finally, number three, which is making yourself understood. Once you have listened, it is your turn to speak. Because you took so much time to understand them, they will 100% be more open to hearing you. And this is the foundation of healthy communication. As we finish off, I'd like to leave you with this quote, which says, and this is directly from the book, it says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So this is really an important takeaway, and I'll leave you with a question that says, when thinking about this, is how many times have you already started planning your comeback while someone else is talking? Wonderful. So this quest that I'm on has been such a phenomenal journey. And before I introduce our amazing speaker, I just wanted to tell you an interaction I had with someone, because every workshop I always give you a context update. I love asking people about what they think interdependence means to them. And that's exactly how myself and Jesse met. But I did meet someone else who's a short storyteller. He's a filmmaker. And I asked him, what does interdependence mean for him? And he said this word for word. If you want to go far, you need to go together. So please comment below, comment in the LinkedIn comments, comment anywhere. I would love to hear what interdependence means for you. Now, if we start talking about the speaker today, JC, I met him at a different community called the Founders Collab, which is led by the Open Letter, and they are really fantastic again for the founders looking to grow at rapid paces. They have workshops weekly, check-ins. It's really a fantastic community again. I never knew about communities, and since I've joined them, I've really grown my network, my knowledge, my life skills. It's just such an amazing place to be, especially as a founder. So there are so many communities that you can find that are aligned with who you are. But myself and Jesse then had a conversation about interdependence. And so is what happened to lead us to today. And I'm so grateful that Jesse has made the time for us today. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Jesse. He holds a master's in data science and AI, a bachelor's in chemical engineering, and is pursuing a master's in future studies at Stellenbosch University. He's interested in innovation, strategic foresight, and startups. A little bit about him on the personal side is that he's avid current affairs. He loves current affairs. He's a history reader. He's a grower of rare orchid and a saxophone player, which he'll be playing for us at the end of the session. I'm just kidding. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Jesse while I stop sharing my screen. Jesse, it is a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for having us. You can start sharing your screen and you
Thanks.
can.
Thanks, Simone. Let's just set up here quickly. Right, just set the scene for us. So I want to talk about interdependence in a very practical example. The example that interests me is how innovations spread amongst social networks and understanding the nature of the people within those networks is critical for understanding whether people will actually adopt an innovation. The reason why I'm interested in this is because this sort of view would have implications on whether people adopt a product, whether you're at work and they adopt a certain kind of technology, etc. So that those questions brought me down on this path, which I hope is quite illuminating to you in terms of how interdependence actually operates in the technological realm. Yeah, so as was mentioned, I'm an engineer, and it was a bit of an eye opener to realize that you actually have to deeply consider the nature of not just the psychological makeup of the people that you're dealing with when you're innovating, but also how they're connected together. Yeah, with that being said, objectives are really to understand how innovations are assessed by people. I want to bring that in so that, let's say you do want to roll out a product or a type of technology, you can have a view of what people are looking at when they're looking at that particular piece of tech. And I'm hoping as I discuss it, you will notice the broader theme of how interdependence actually operates there. I want to discuss how innovations diffuse in social networks. So we're going to go into certain psychological profiles that people have when they assess different kinds of technology. And I want to briefly discuss how to conduct a social network analysis at an organization. I've done this before, and I'll just give you some tips if you ever want to do that, if you're faced with the prospect of wanting to roll out a product amongst a certain small group of people or have some sort of tech being adopted in an organization. So let's start with a typical problem. So I was a consultant for a few years where I was implementing AI and data science solutions. And I was often faced with a very broad issue that went on the lines like this. I'm a business executive who's tasked with rolling out a tool in my organization. The organization is mandated to use the tool. I think it's going to increase a lot of efficiency. However, there's been very little adoption within the organization. So that the broad outline happened to me quite a few times. Technology is obvious. It looks like it's going to create a lot of difference, but people aren't actually wanting to adopt it or use it. Why? And that's I want to answer for us today. Why? Why don't people just adopt innovations if it looks so much better. And the answer really does lie in the interdependence question or answer. I want to just run us through a little bit of theory. So innovation theory part one, and the big thing I want us to take home is that innovations are not neutral. When people look at any piece of technology, whether it's digital technology or physical technology, they tend to assess it across 5 different dimensions. Just to preface this, these ideas are not my own. This was written in a book in the 1960s by a man who was studying innovation diffusion in farmlands in America called Everett Rogers. So I'm going to be borrowing heavily from his book as we go through this. Yeah, so the 5 different dimensions that people look at when they assess technology is relative advantage. So is the technology better than what they currently use? Is it generally better? Does it actually add value to my life? It's compatibility, which I think is a big one that is often overlooked. Does it fit in with the existing values, habits, workflows of that person? Again, you can understand from an interdependence point of view, that is understanding the situation, the context of the person that you're busy dealing with. People will also ask the question of whether it's complex. Is it too complex to understand or use? There's also a trialability component when they're looking at that piece of technology. Can people test it before committing? And here's another interdependence element is observability. People want to see other people using that innovation to actually trust it. So if we were to make those 5 dimensions more practical, I will not adopt an innovation if it does not really improve upon what I currently use. I will not adopt an innovation if it does not fit in with how I work, think, or behave. I will not adopt an innovation if it's too difficult to understand. I will not adopt an innovation if it costs me something to try it out. And I will not adopt an innovation if I do not see others using it. So you can see that in these 5 different elements, there's questions that need to be answered about the makeup of that person in terms of their context, as well as the social setting in terms of where they sit. How do people use it? Do they see other people using it, etc.? So I'll also make this even more practical. So I'm gonna compare 2 products. I'm gonna compare a product where we're doing meeting note taking, and the one is an AI note taker, and the other one is Google Docs, where someone just puts notes into a Google Doc after every meeting. It's very simple solution, but that's the way that they work. So we've got these 2 products that are in play for the same purpose of taking notes for meetings. So product 1, Google Docs, making notes, taking notes during a meeting. It's free, it's easy to use, and it can easily be shared with others. Okay, product 2, as we've seen recently, AI note takers, it automates the meeting notes. Premium tier costs a few dollars per month, and I have to log on to the platform to see the notes and expect others to do it as well when sharing. So we've got 2 different products here. I want to compare them in terms of those 5 different dimensions. So if we had to ask for this user, which product will be adopted? So obviously it is product 1. Innovations do not get adopted even if they do the job better. So we might say the AI note takers is much better, can do the job a lot better. And I think us as technologists, as innovators, often make that mistake. And that's because we don't often compare that innovation with the context of the person, how they're using it, as well as the dynamics of that particular solution in terms of those 5 different dimensions. Right, so then I want to talk a little bit about the adopter profiles that we see. And you'll see as I'm building along on this presentation, we're going to deal with how people see the innovation. Now we're going to talk about the individual profiles of the people, and then we're going to talk about the social network. So when people adopt technology, they often fall on some sort of psychological profile that was actually specified by Everett Rogers in the 1960s, which puts people into different buckets, either early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And it's usually a function of a few different things, usually related to a person's threshold for change. And we have different thresholds psychologically for different changes that innovations can bring upon us. Yeah, adopter psychological profiles vary significantly within a group. Not everyone is an early adopter of an innovation, so you will have people that are laggards or later adopters that have resistance towards particular innovations. And there's a significant portion of any sample of people who resist adopting an innovation. As I said, each profile has its own characteristics and are sensitive to different parts of that five-dimensional analysis. So, for instance, a person who's an early adopter might have much less of an issue if the adoption, if the innovation isn't adding as much value, as long as it's new and cool, for instance. So they assess those five different dimensions very differently when confronted with the exact same product. Yeah, so for instance, early adopters care less if they do not see others using the innovation. So they readily will just take up an innovation where, for instance, someone who has a kind of a late majority psychological profile will want to see many other people using that innovation before they actually trust it. It is interesting when you actually dig into these different psychological profiles that they have different commonalities within each bucket. So, for instance, early adopters are generally more cosmopolitan, so they usually are in big cities. They follow news closely, generally are more educated, they are more networked with innovators, for instance. I'm saying this not to say that early adopters are great. I'm just saying that the profile that makes them common has a certain makeup, just like laggards, just like the late majority, just like innovators, for instance. And it's important to note that no psychological profile is better than the next. It's literally the context in which they find themselves dictates how they will adopt a particular innovation. So there's some implications up to now based on these profiles. So these implications are, especially to the innovator or the person who wants to introduce a product or a particular tech in a group of people, is do you know the innovation profile of the people that you're dealing with? Do you know their ways of working and thinking? Do you know the ways of currently solving the problem? Do you know who cares about seeing others use the technology? So you can see that we've just taken that psychological view and we've flipped these questions in terms of those five dimensions, in terms of how people assess the technology. So if we want to build on this even further, we could understand the social network with a group of people that we want to see this innovation or product adopted. Usually the view looks like this. So there's no understanding of the interdependence within that particular group of people. It's five different people, or it could be 100 different people, it could be an entire organization, but there's no understanding of the profile of these people or how they interact. And this is usually how most projects are taken on, with having this intentionality on this particular view. So we could take it one step further. So this is the part two, which is the psychological profiles. We could profile each one of the people that we need, that we're dealing with in terms of the technology that we want them to adopt. And we might find, okay, person one is a late adopter, person two is a laggard, person three is a late adopter, person four is an early adopter, person five is also an early adopter. So we can do a psychological profile in terms of how they understand and see tech, and we could get an understanding of maybe their resistance to adopt a particular piece of technology. But you could see this view is only one step deeper than view one, which was this view. This view, it needs to go one step further, which is how do they interact? And once we understand how they interact, we can understand how a innovation will be adopted and diffused throughout this network. So this only shows an atomized view of each person, and you would need to go a step further to understand how they interrelate. So let's say we did a survey and we try to understand how people interact with one another. And we found, if we have to, with these arrows, that person two interacts with person one generally, Person 3 interacts with person 1, person 4 generally also with person 1, but there's also some interaction with person 5. You can see that this interaction profile has certain dynamics to it. Potentially shows how people might adopt an innovation. So you might see that this early adopter number 5 adopts that innovation, and that influences person number 4 because they're an early adopter. But because person 3 is a late adopter, they might only adopt that innovation once they see person 1, person 4, and person 5. I'm just speculating here, for instance. But once you understand how people interact and what their psychological profiles are, you can begin speculating how that innovation might actually diffuse amongst that group of people. So let's say we got this social network over here. How does this affect our rollout strategy for a particular product? We might say, okay, person number 5 needs to be our product champion. They need to be the person who is, I don't know, the AI evangelist in the team. They need to promote it, use it, show other people how to use it. They can be the champion. Person 1 might need tailored change management because he's critical to this network. If I can get person 1 to believe and understand that this is an innovation worth adopting based on those 5 characteristics, then I can convert person 2 and I can potentially convert person 3. Person 4 will be easy because they're an early adopter, because they've seen person 5 already use it, our champion. But person 1 is important. And that's where you might say, okay, that person needs tailored change management because they are key in the social network and the dynamics of the social network. Person 2, because he's isolated in the network and he's not interacting with person 5, person 3, and person 4, he may need dedicated attention, one-on-one hand-holding. Now, you could see how this is very different to just mandating using a technology and expecting it to diffuse and suddenly be used within a group of people. It takes a much deeper view of interdependence, as well as understanding the context and the psychological profile of those group of people in terms of innovation. Right, so I want to just sum up quickly some of the learnings. If you want to go deeper, there's a book I can recommend by Everett Rogers called The Diffusion of Innovations, which goes into a lot more depth than this, and there's so much wealth of knowledge in it. But yeah, let's sum this up. So point number 1 is you must understand the adopter profile of the people you're looking to for innovation adoption. You must understand how each profile sees the proposed technology in light of those 5 dimensions. Do they see it as actually adding value? Does it fit in with the ways of thinking, the ways of working, or does it create hurdles, unnecessary hurdles? You must understand that very deeply. You must understand how each profile interacts with one another. So how do they work? How do they observe one another working? Who's friends with one another? Who shares work with one another? Who shares information? So there's these different kinds of interactions that can illuminate how these different psychological profiles interact with one another. So you can get an understanding of who's important in that network to focus on if you want to roll out a product. And then you should create tailored strategies that maximize diffusion. So if we go to that previous slide, it was very simple, but it was identifying who's the product champion, who's the person that needs dedicated time, who's the person that needs a bit of hand-holding on change management, for instance. And I do think it is tailored strategies. I don't think you can, with much success, give a generic strategy unless you have an understanding of the network and how they interact. I think it has to be a little bit more tailored. So I also want to just leave you with how I would go about this. So this might sound very foreign, like how do you even construct a social network? I did do this for a company where I conducted a survey, and we just wanted to understand how information flows within the organization beyond the org chart. How do people escalate information? Who's the key man in the particular org? So I conducted a survey where I just tried to understand the the friendship circles, the work circles, the informational flows within that organization. And it provided very rich information about social networks there. So this is what I do. I'd limit the scope of the strategy to clearly define the sample of people. So you need to define who's in the sample, who's out. So who are the people that you want to deeply understand? Whose psychology do you want to understand when it comes to innovation? Who's in, who's out? What is this? What is the clear dimensions of the study? You need to survey these people to understand their views of innovation. So of the particular innovation. So let's say it's adopting AI in the workplace. Deeply understand how they see that innovation in terms of those 5 different dimensions. It'll be hugely valuable because it will expose things that might show you that, hey, they see it very differently to how I see it. It's not as value generating, for instance. That's weird. Let me dig in more. Let me understand why. Then you must survey these people such that their innovation adopter profile can be understood. So that could just be, it can be, there's certain questions you can ask, but it would be on the lines of, are you a techie? Do you adopt tech easily? Or do you find yourself using a new app? Do you go and read tech blogs? So there are some standard questions you can ask to see how comfortable people are when it comes to using new technology. For instance, I'm not someone that actively uses new technology, even though I'm in the AI space. It's actually very difficult for me to adopt new technology. I have a resistance to change. I like, once I know technology works for me, I like using that technology. I don't like being disrupted. So understanding that about each and every other person in the sample is very important. And then you must survey these people such that you can understand how they interact. So how do they interact with one another? Interaction is so much more than just who works with who's using what tech. It can be who's friends with who. So you can understand who's influencing one another in that sample. And then construct a social network and use the information to tailor the adoption strategies that you want to follow. Yeah, thank you. That's all from my side.
Amazing. Thank you so much, JC. It is such a fantastic, phenomenal workshop. Just before we transition over to our Zoom session, just wanted to see if anyone had any questions. You can comment on LinkedIn. They will pop through in real time and we will be able to see them. And then we will be transitioning over to Zoom. So I just wanted to give them one moment just to see if there are any comments or any questions that anyone had. I'm going to start sharing my screen and then we will basically transition over to Zoom. I'm just giving it a moment or two. But again, thank you, JC, so much. It has been such a privilege to listen to you speak about innovation and the social networks. It's really such great insights. I think for anyone who's in the innovation space, this is really a cheat sheet that you've given them and a sliver of such valuable, rich information. So, JC, on behalf of myself, successfully self-employed, thank you for your time. We're so grateful to have you. And in saying that, we are going to then transition over to our private Zoom call where I'll just be going through a couple of questions. For this quest, I'm super, super excited. This is where you'll have your pens and papers and we'll be able to have a more engaging space. And yeah, so thank you for JC again. I'm just so grateful. And we are going to then end the live here and move over to Zoom. Thank you so much, Sam. Fantastic. Fantastic. So I'm just going to wait a few moments just to make sure if there are anyone who wants to transition over from Zoom, over from LinkedIn into the Zoom session, that we're going to get started. Fantastic. Amazing. So great. Amazing. So again, thank you so much, Jessie, for the session. I see that we actually do have a question that I didn't see come through, Jessie. Let me just quickly read this question. And let me know if you want to just open up the channel for a conversation. It was really such an insightful session. So let's see. This one comes from Candace, and this says, or this is from the chat. It says, what are the big areas of resistance we may encounter in this process?
So I think that resistance is actually a very indicative thing if you don't understand that resistance. That is more like a key indicator that's something that needs to be dug into. So, especially if it is saying you must adopt a particular type, let's say there's a mandate for adopting a particular type of technology. If you don't understand that resistance, that's probably a key indicator for you to dig in a little bit deeper. And that will probably be really richly rewarding because it might actually change the way that innovation looks. It might actually change the configuration of it because it will probably reveal along those 5 dimensions why they don't think it's so valuable. And that could be a good key for you to improve that innovation itself. Doesn't really answer your question, but I think resistance is part of the process. It's part of the discovery process.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I definitely agree with putting resistance as part of the process. As part of the sales cycle, I always say self-doubt is part of the process. So I loved your answer and thank you so much. Again, a big thank you. I can't thank you enough. This has really been such an insightful session. Now, what I really want to do is Jesse spoke a lot about innovation, and for the people who aren't really in the innovation space, I wanted to make this I want you to be able to take home and to have some things that you want to think about on top of the very insightful things. And I hope that if you're not in the innovation space and we're thinking about it, that this has really inspired you to join the innovation space. I'm also hoping that we can now, with this new group knowledge that JC has parted with us, that we can start thinking about innovation with interdependence. So absolutely, what a fantastic session. But what we are going to do now is we're going to take this and apply this to our social networks, as JC mentioned, and looking deeper as communication, how the information flows beyond, as JC said, the organizational chart, and who are the key people that we need to communicate with. So this is going to be about you answering these questions in your private capacity. So let's begin with the first question. And this again is communication. As I mentioned in the beginning of the session, the foundation of interdependence is all about communication. So we are leveraging JC's fantastic workshop and taking the bits that are related to communication, but also taking away a wealth of knowledge. So the first question says, is the last time a colleague came to me with a mistake, a major delay or structural failure, what was my immediate reaction? Did my response invite collaboration, or did it subtly signal that mistakes aren't safe here? So have a think about this, write down. This is really more about introspection and about your ability to communicate in these social networks and your responsibility of when people are bringing inevitable mistakes. As humans, we are bound to make mistakes. We are imperfect. And to think that we live in a perfect world is setting other people up for failure. So be fiercely honest here. I will read the question one more time and give you about 4 minutes to answer the question in your own pace, but really engage with this and be fiercely honest. So I'm going to ask the question again and then give you about 4 minutes. The last time a colleague came to me with a mistake, a major delay, or a structural failure, what was my immediate reaction? Did my response invite open collaboration, or did it subtly signal that mistakes aren't safe here? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to answer that question. Take your time. This is at your own pace. Fantastic. As we are finishing up with that question, I think it's really about thinking about those times when you had an emotional response and you allowed your emotions to control you. And we speak about this because we want to give you tools to be able to process this. It's quite difficult because sometimes when you feel emotional, it's difficult to practice, like doing sit-ups. You exercise those muscles. So, what's best is to have a specific protocol when you feel that, and to also practice it outside of feeling emotional. So, this could be a technique of habits, going for a walk, and breathing. And I know that we've heard this countless times, but the thing is that it actually works. Just taking a moment to breathe, taking a moment to just remove yourself from the situation is really how we start to build healthy communication. And instead of building that quick assumption, we're allowing ourselves, or that quick response, we're allowing ourselves the space to step outside of our emotions. Let's have a look at the second question. Now, this one is more about the informational networks and thinking about what this reveals about what you value most in communication. So I'm going to ask the question, when I pass information or updates to my team, what do I naturally tend to highlight? So this could mean the risks, the things that you shouldn't do, human impact, timelines, all the different things that you send in emails or communication. What is that most important thing that is a string between all the communications? The reason I'm asking this is because we all have natural communication bias. So, recognizing your personal lens helps you to see if you're accidentally leaving out details that other adopter profiles in your network need to move forwards. So, we're digging a bit deeper again in ourselves. How do I send information? How do I communicate? What do I tend to highlight? So I'm going to give you again a couple of minutes to answer that one, and then we'll be right back. Okay, I'm going to give you less than a minute to finish up. And again, this is, as I mentioned, for communication bias, just trying to understand how are we communicating, styles of communication, what is important to you in communication versus what is important to others in communication. Fantastic. So now we're going to move on to the next question. And this one is about an echo chamber. So this one says, look at the last 5 people I spoke with or messaged out of habit. And this is in the workspace. Do they all look, think, and work exactly like me? Or am I actively reaching across the network to connect with people who hold completely different perspectives? So we all understand what an echo chamber is. And if we're speaking to the same people with the same ideas who are agreeing with us and not challenging us to grow, then it's what an echo chamber is. So this really is a question about those around you and the types of people that you're surrounding yourself with, and to try to avoid echo chambers and to have a diverse network. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that one. And yeah, we are almost nearing the end of the session. So take your time and really think about these questions. Really take a deep dive. We're allowing you the space and time. You're at this workshop, and we're giving you this moment to really spend time in introspection. So please take this opportunity to really think about these questions as we have given you the space and the time. I'm just going to give you less than under a minute to finish that question. Fantastic. So our next question is, what is a standard corporate process or tool in my organization that I deliberately bypass or sneak around because it's too complex or slow? And then let's start with that question, because I think that's a very good question in itself. So let's just start with that question, which I'll repeat again. What is the standard corporate process or tool in my organization that I deliberately bypass or sneak around because it's too complex or slow? This one really speaks about high complexity and what drives people to find alternative solutions and unofficial network paths to get things done. So that's what the second question is about. So we're really just thinking about the tools that you on a daily basis are bypassing, are using in a different way, or maybe you're defaulting to a communication method instead of using the tool. Maybe you're sending an email instead of creating a comment on a Notion document. There's so many different ways, and these are just examples. But what are these processes or tools that you are bypassing? Fantastic. So now that you've thought about that, let's look at this in a different way. And who is someone who helps you to bypass that workaround? So exactly what I was saying is if you are supposed to be using for example, a Monday.com board for a specific task, but instead you're directly DMing someone in Slack, who is that person that you are not using the processes that have been implemented with? And then, as I mentioned, this is finding the unofficial network paths to get things done. And that's why this is important. Identifying your own workarounds shows you where the formal organization charts is really failing its users. So that's the foundation of this question and putting it all together. So, what are these tools that you're bypassing? But who's helping you bypass these tools? Fantastic. And now our last question, which is a bit of innovation mixed into it. And this one speaks about, am I someone who expects people to adopt my ideas based purely on my verbal argument? Or do I take time to show visible, physical proof that my way of working actually yields better results? So this is more about show them, don't tell them. And when we say argument, we don't mean actually arguing. We're just saying that the ideas that you have, how are you getting these across to people? People often refuse to adopt innovation if they cannot see the other person using it successfully first. So, journaling about this helps you realize that the best communication strategy isn't really about talking more. It's about making your success visible. Show them, don't tell them. So, again, think about when you are trying to enforce ideas, or as they said, verbal arguments. Do you take time to show visible, physical proof that your way of working is actually better? Do you have the proof? Do you have the data that says this way is better? Are you sure of what you are saying as well? I'm going to give you a little bit less than a minute to answer that one as we are going to close off very shortly. Fantastic. So we've come to the end of our session. Again, I wanted to thank Jessie for such a fantastic session, successfully self-employed, for allowing us the opportunity and the platform to speak. And really, it's been such an amazing experience for me. I'd love for everybody to take away from this the different tidbits that they took away, but also to come and join us, have a conversation with us, comment on this on the LinkedIn post, comment everywhere. We really just want to hear what you think. We really want to hear more about you. So again, thank you so much for everybody for joining us. Jessie, thank you again, and goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.